for Mark's soul, and he's sitting down. I have no doubt according to all of Jewish belief. Come, I'll tell you something. The reason why you don't say Yiskor, why a person who loses a parent in the first year doesn't leave the shul but doesn't say Yiskor, because according to a more mystical approach, what really happens on the last day of the Yom Tov, Hashem kills the neshamas in heaven. So just put infrared glasses on, look what's happening in heaven. Heaven is just a much more real world than this world. Just that we can't see it, we're blinded to it. Like a blind person can't see color. One day he opens up his eyes and says, wow, I never knew this whole world existed. There's a whole world, and that world is actually here. The dimension is here, it's just that we can't see it. But to those souls who are celebrating Yom Tov in heaven, on the last day, Hashem says to the souls in heaven, go and spend a few moments with your kids, to make place for the living soul, to make place for those souls that are going to come down. People with living parents leave the room to make place. But in the first year, you don't say Yiskor. Why? Because the neshama is there anyways. So in other words, whenever you think about a soul, whenever you pray for a soul, after death, the soul prays for you and thinks about you. But in the first year, it's far more intense. There's no more physical limitation, but he's right there. So it's a very, very powerful experience. Now, particularly when you learn, when a group of us get together to learn Torah for a neshama in heaven, it brings in tremendous energy and food. So I have no doubt, and I'm allowed to say this, that he's saying, enough with the food, enough with the food. But I'm sure he appreciates it. So let's go like this. Let's just go through the Mishnahs again, because we haven't learned. Mishnah 1 told us how Moshe got the Torah from Sinai, and he passed it to Joshua to the elders to the prophets to the men of the Great Assembly. That was a 5-step program of how to change your life. You need the humility of Moses, the perseverance of Joshua. You need always to see the bigger picture like an elder, that even if somebody spills on the table, just leave it. The prophet sees the unintended consequence, what's going to happen afterwards. But the men of the Great Assembly, when everything's mucked up, they make a difference. And those are the 5 steps that we need in life to transform our life. Then we got to Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik was the last of the men of the Great Assembly, and he lived at the time of Alexander the Great. I think we discussed that. But the Gemara says about Shimon HaTzadik that as long as he was alive, he served in the temple for 40 years. He died, I think he lived to 120. As long as he was in the temple, there were a whole bunch of miracles that took place in the temple. A whole bunch of miracles took place. And after he died, it wasn't always so. But he said like this, get your life right. Torah brings heaven down to earth. Avoid a prayer elevates the physical world. And acts of goodness and kindness emulates God. So if you want to be intimate with God and you want to make God experience in all this world, and these rules are so simple, right? Those are the 3 rules to the world. The rules to the world is bring godliness down to this world through Torah, you bring heaven on earth, pray, you lift God up, and acts of goodness and kindness makes God manifest himself in this world. Good. Now, just to put it into timeline over here. So that's the famous Alexander the Great. Straight after Alexander the Great died, he died very young at 33. It's interesting what happened, but his empire, I think, broke up into 4. And there were the King Ptolemies, and they were the beginning of the Greek influence. Now, the famous story of the Torah being translated by 70 sages, which was forced upon them by King Ptolemy, comes up now. It's not mentioned in the Mishnah, but that's the history of it. I think it's about 250 years before the destruction of the temple. Then comes Antignos Ishsoich. Antignos Ishsoich speaks about ourselves. How do we serve God? And how do we serve God? You have to have love and fear. Of course, you start off a kid, promise a kid reward for doing good and being punished for doing bad. But eventually you want to get out of that. Eventually you want to have a relationship with God that transcends fear, that transcends reward and punishment. And how many from people walk around so scared to do something because God is going to punish us? Our relationship with God has to be far deeper than that. That's what Antignos Ishsoich spoke about. And now we come to so he spoke about yourself. Now we come to the 2 pairs. Now we come to the 2 pairs, and the 2 pairs spoke about Antignos. Shimon HaTzadik gave you the 3 pillars for life. Antignos Ishsoich speaks to me how you're going to pray, how you're going to serve God, and now how you treat your family. And that is the 2 Yossis, right? Yossi says you have to have ambience in your house. The key is ambience. And Yossi ben Yochanan says you have to have kindness in your house. Your kindness has to be open. So Yossi is, the first Yossi is dealing with somebody who lives far, far from Yerushalayim, where there's no ambience. He says, make your house the center of all discussions. Your kids will pick up that ambience, and what you speak about positively in your house will affect your kids. The second Yossi speaks about what happens if in Yerushalayim, when there's a lot of that. Then you've got to have kindness. Your house has to be open to everybody. Now we're going to speak about how you treat your friends, and that is Nitar Bailey and Yeshua ben Parachia. Nitar Bailey and Yeshua ben Parachia speaks. Yeshua ben Parachia says you have to appoint a teacher, you have to have a friend, and you have to judge people favorably. And as I explained before, judging people favorably helps you and helps the other person. Because a person who doesn't think about people favorably, they walk around so negative, just negative. But if you think about people favorably, you positive, and you also bring out the good in the other person. And Nitar Bailey speaks about somebody even closer, your neighbor, because your neighbor is not your friend. He has access to your house every minute of the day, and he can walk in and he causes big trouble. Where's your husband? Why is your husband so late at home from work, etc., etc. They can be very negative people. So now we've spoken about our family, and now people close to us, friends and neighbors. Now we're going to speak to the community at large. And that was Yehuda ben Taba and Shimon ben Shotach. And they speak about how you have to make sure to interrogate witnesses. Now, both of these people suffered terribly. If I'm not mistaken, Shimon ben Shotach lost a child who was executed because of a false witness. And Yehuda ben Tabai, somebody was put to death because of a false witness. And I think for the rest of his life, he used to go apologize to him after death. But they understood how false witnesses could cause so much trouble. Now remember, it was a very volatile period for the Jewish people. You focus in on this, you don't realize the stresses that these people had in life. We're just getting their teachings, but they had real stresses. The two people who took over after them, which we've discussed, was Shmaya and Avtalion. Shmaya just speaks of just loving work. Loving work. Just getting in. Love your work, love work, etc. Stay away from power, stay under the radar. That was his thing. And Avtalion said as follows. Avtalion was now living with the consequences from what happened when Antigonus Ish-Soicha made his famous statement. Don't serve God because of reward, serve God because you love and fear God. But people misunderstood what he said. Two students misunderstood what he said, and they created a new religion called the Tzaddukim, which came back to haunt the Jewish people. And therefore Avtalion learnt, although Antigonus Ish-Soicha was very good meaning with his words, but because they weren't 100% clear, two of his students misinterpreted them, and a whole new religion started, which came to haunt the Jewish people throughout the Second Temple. Good. Now we're about 30 years before the destruction of the Second Temple. So the Mishnah starts with the men of the Great Assembly. They were, while the Jewish people were still in Persia, they were certainly there at the beginning of the building of the Second Temple. Ezra led them, and now we've gone all the way to about 10 or 20 years before the destruction of the Second Temple, which was in the year 70 of our common era. And who are the two sages who led us through this very, very turbulent time? None other than Hillel. And Hillel said like this. Hillel was great. Hillel said, there are two types of people. There are people who love belligerency. They love it when there's fighting at home. They love it when there's an argument. They don't know how to survive if there's not a fight, there's not drama. He says, don't be like that. Just love peace, pursue peace, and find the godliness in everybody. And then we heard from Sham, and then he also said like this: if you're pushing your own name, you're going to lose your name. Just very practical stuff. And then he said like this, and then he gives you ingredients of how to change your life. And he says like this: if you're not for yourself, who's going to be for you? If you're only for yourself, you're totally selfish. But when you put this program in place, you don't start your diet next Monday. You don't start your program next week. You start it today. Now this is when you start things. That's where we're up to in the Mishnah. Now let's learn Shammai. Okay. Now Shammai by nature was a much more strict person. Now if you put infrared glasses on, each and every one of us has a soul. That soul has 10 powers, 3 intellectual, 7 emotional. Now it could be, or it is by everybody, that one of those powers are going to be more dominant than the other. By the way, this is also connected to the days between Pesach and Shavuos. You see, there are 49 days. It's all connected to this, all connected to our soul powers. But anyways, if the person sitting next to me, if his dominant power is kindness, just like a naturally kind, outlooking person, he's going to be very lenient. He's always going to find the way to make a plan. That's the kind person. But if there's a person who's naturally strict, he's going to just interpret the world differently, and he's going to be much more strict. That was Hillel and Shammai. Shammai, the dominant power in his soul was severity, was strictness. And therefore, whenever he looked at things, he looked at it from a strict point of view. And that's why Shammah is always more strict than Hillel, except in very few cases. Now look at Shammah's statement. This is Shammah's credo that Shammah would say. Shammah says like this. This is where we're up to. Asay Teros Kvar. One of the things that Shimon HaTzadik told us was the great importance of learning Torah. Now, you know, today in this disposable world that we live in, we actually discount these things. But if you remember, Shimon HaTzadik said that one of the pillars to making this world go round is Torah. When a group of ladies who could be doing anything else at this particular moment commit to learning Torah, at this moment we bring a godliness into this world that doesn't come from the higher spiritual worlds. It comes all the way into our heads. It becomes enveloped in our heads. Our heads are enveloping it. It's becoming one with us. We are becoming totally godly. So that all of us learning Torah now are becoming totally godly. We have absolute godliness, and we're illuminating the world with godliness. And therefore, you'll see later in the second chapter, it says, if calamity is facing the Jewish people, increase in learning Torah. When there's a virus that's going around, a terrible pandemic, let's make Torah go viral. And that's what he says. You mustn't play with Torah. You must make permanent times for it. If it's 9 to 9:30 on a Monday morning, you don't play with that, number one. And number two, when you are learning, it also has to be your most important thing in life. In other words, you don't have to do something 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but you know what's your primary aim in this world. Torah, if it's the half an hour that you're learning, you cannot flirt with it. And when you're learning, you cannot be sending messages, you cannot be distracted like we are because of this mad world that we live in. You have to be totally committed to it. That you see strictness coming out. Once you live like that, or in order to live like that, you have to be a person who generally is quieter. What do you mean quieter? Not that he never speaks, but emomat ba'asa harba. There are two types of people. The people who are always promising and talking and this and that and everything. If somebody walks by them, yeah, I'll do that, I'll do this. He says, don't do that. Rather speak little and do a lot. Teach yourself to under-promise and over-deliver. See that strictness coming out. And then he says, receive everybody with a cheerful countenance. Now that seems so simple that all of us could have written. But the truth of the matter is, it's not so simple. If you remember the famous story, based on what I told you now that his nature was not like that. His nature was an impatient person. His nature was, his school didn't allow people in, by the way. You had to be wealthy, well pedigreed to go to his school. So he didn't agree with the men of the Great Assembly who said, raise up many students. That wasn't his school. His school was the Michael House of schools. He said, no, you've got to be at a particular level. You've got to pay to come in. Very strict. He had no time for nonsense. And that's why when the convert came to see him, he said, and the convert asked him, teach me the whole Torah while standing on one foot. He took a ruler and he says, cheers, not for you here. Kicked him out. The measurements of my building don't allow such stupidity. The same guy goes to Hillel, and Hillel thinks about it for a minute and gives him an answer. And I think this is the key. That was when Shammai heard that. Shammai changed his entire life. That although inside I can be in a particular way, and my natural temperament is not to have patience for somebody who's an idiot or for somebody who asks stupid questions, I've got to change that. Because if somebody's sitting in front of me, I've always got to make him feel good. Why? Because that's a creature of God standing in front of me. So I think the great statement over here, this is why this statement is so good, because some of us as we get to our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s in life, we say, that's me, that is the way I am. What this statement is telling you, that Shammai turned around his life. From then on, he made a point to receive people favorably, and not just in a false manner, by the way. He genuinely sat down and he said, you know what, I'm going to receive you favorably, even if in me it's not like that to do. Which teaches us that the true definition of a frum person is not somebody who does something by rote, but somebody who at any age has pointed out that they're doing something wrong, and they have the humility, they have the sensitivity, they have belief in themselves, belief in Hashem, that I've got to change it. And that's the ultimate frum person. That's the ultimate great person. And that's what Shammai is teaching us. That if in today we think, if today then we find in ourselves something that is wrong, change it, and you can change it. And particularly when it comes to people, everybody has to feel special. Everybody has to feel special. We want to feel special in somebody's company, etc. And one day when we learn Brichas Kohanim, the Kohanim's blessing, you'll see it's all included in that, by the way. Different types of love. the way you show somebody love. The next Mishnah is Rabban Gamliel. Now let me give you the history. So now we've got up to Hillel and Shammai. Now Shammai had a kid by the name of Shimon, which is not mentioned here for some reason. And now we have Rabban Gamliel, who was a grandson, if I'm not mistaken, of Hillel. He was a grandson, he was a direct descendant. And who are you? He used to say like this. Now he's living in a time, now go back, and if you remember, Yeshua ben Parachia taught us that we have to have a mentor. What is a mentor in life? A mentor is there to give you general direction in life, philosophy, etc. Mentor is the one I ask, do you think I should be wearing a shaitel? Not wearing a shaitel at this stage in my journey in life. Do you think I should chalav Yisrael? No, that's a mentor. But then you have to have another Rav. And the other Rav tells you Jewish law. What does that mean? So there it says, Asay lecha Rav. So in the 6th or 7th Mishnah, when we had it, they were speaking about a mentor. And you had speaking about a rabbi that you ask, is this kosher or not? I.e., I bought this, well, you don't have it so much today, but in the olden days, up until 1950, first of all, there were big butcheries. They cut the meat in front of you. It wasn't like it is today. But you actually sometimes will buy a chicken from a shochet. You would then take it to the butcher, salt it, etc., etc. Often a time it wasn't kosher. You had to take it to a Rav. Is the chicken kosher or not? Now let me share with you a story. He says you have to have a Rav, not just in kashrus, but in every area of your life. Why? V'istalek min hasofik, to take you away from doubt. Example, by the way. Let me give you a few examples. This is a lady share. Number one, there's a famous story with the first Lubavitcher Rebbe. The first Lubavitcher Rebbe, a guy brought him a chicken. He felt the chicken wasn't kosher. The Alter Rebbe was a great author of Tanya and a great Rav. His time was very valuable. He said, let me look at the case. He looked at the chicken. He said, let me look into it. Starts opening books, and he's studying to see if the chicken's kosher. The guy falls asleep. Short while afterwards, he wakes up. He says, Rebbe, you've been spending so much time on this chicken. Your time is far more value than the value of the chicken. It's far more valuable than the value of the chicken. Listen to what the Alter Rebbe said. If you heard the chicken's soul in heaven begging me to pronounce it kosher, you too would spend hours. So that teaches us something. When a Rav says something's not kosher, you're destroying souls over there. We're not just speaking about, it's kosher, it's not kosher. There are consequences in the spiritual heavens. Every single thing has a soul. And therefore I can write philosophy for myself. Easy. But when somebody is standing in front of me, I bend over backwards to find a leniency. That's what he's speaking of here. It's not clever to be too frum. When you don't have to be too frum, there's frum in philosophy, and that's fine. But when you're dealing with a real life case in front of you, you see it a lot by Hilchas Niddah. Hilchas Niddah, a Rav will bend over backwards in the laws of family purity to permit the case. And that's why you need a Rav. You need to take away from Sophic. You need to get doubt out of your mind. Doubt is the killer. I have to make a decision and be clear. So I think the consequences of this law can extend to any area of life. Over here he's speaking about Jewish law. There's an old Jewish saying, too frum is a galach. Too frum is a Catholic priest. We don't want to be too frum. Right? We want to do what the law requires. That's what I need a Rav for. And it's not clever for me to say, I'm just not going to use it. That's not true. You've thrown away something that's got godly energy in it, and you've decided it's not kosher. You've destroyed it. And this, by the way, is the key thing to remember, that every single thing in this world, human beings, animals, fish, fowl, insects, vegetation, and even inanimate matter have a soul in them. And bearing in mind, we're either elevating it or we're destroying it. That's very important to do. And therefore, you have to understand what you're doing. If I could digress for a minute, the story might bore you, but I'm sure it will grow in you. There was a certain man, I'm not sure if it was the first Lubavitcher Rebbe or the third Lubavitcher Rebbe, but a certain man went to one of them and he said, Rebbe, the doctors have told me I've got a lung disease. And they said it's very, very bad. I'm going to die. Please can I have a blessing? So the Rebbe said to him, if you go to Israel, you will live. If you stay here, you will die. And then he explained, that lung disease that you have is brought about in kashrut with regard to an animal. And in Jewish law, not for the shiur, there's arguments in Jewish law. And sometimes there are arguments between Sfardim and Ashkenazim in Jewish law. Russia was Ashkenazi country. The Ashkenazi Rav, the Ramah, passed the law that if an animal had that particular disease, the animal was not kosher. Therefore, the Alter Rebbe said, because you live here, and the Torah rule is that that animal is going to die, it's not kosher. Therefore, if you stay, you're going to die. However, if you go to Israel, where the Sfardim, Rav Yosef Karo, leads the community or set the tone for the community, and he said it's kosher, if you go there, you will live. Now, to me, that is unbelievable. We don't understand the power of Jewish law. We don't understand the power of words that come out of our mouths. And therefore, you must get rid of doubt. And I want to extend that. If you take the Hebrew word Amalek was the nation that gave us doubt after we left Israel. Amalek and Sophic is the same thing. Amalek and Sophic is the same numerical value. The worst thing to be in life in Sophic, I don't know where I'm going. Make a decision. You want to spend 3 weeks on it, but make a decision. How many people do we know that for the last 30 years have been on the fence? I'm going to Israel, I'm going to Australia, I'm not going to Israel. I'm going to Australia, I'm not going. And make a decision. I'm not judging your decision, but make a decision. But you can't live in doubt and not do. You've got to make a decision one way or the other. You want to say for 5 years I'm staying here, 5 years I'm staying here. And everybody's entitled to their decision. But get rid of doubt. There's some people, if you ever see, go with them to a restaurant. The cutest thing to see. The waiter comes and takes the order. And they sit there 20 minutes, this order, the menu that they know so well. They go through it, they're discussing it backwards, forwards. Eventually they make a decision. They're going to have a monkey gland hamburger. As the waiters walk away, no, please come back. I need to think that through. Maybe I'll have a salad. I'm a bit overweight. Maybe I'll have a salad. The waiter does more exercise walking up and down while this man is deciding what he's going to have if he's having a hamburger salad and which type of dressing on the hamburger sector. And then comes the cold drink. Is it plain water? Is it sparkling water? Or is it Diet Coke? And the poor waiter is going nuts. What I think it's saying is make a decision. So this Mishnah, the takeaway from this Mishnah can apply so much in someone's life. Make a decision. Because after tomorrow, it doesn't really matter anyways what decision you made on such small things. Because when you make a decision, you get rid of doubt from yourself. And he goes on to say, even when it comes to charity. Now, let me clarify. There are 3 types of charity. There's one charity that brings peace to the world. You're driving, you see beggars in the street. I do think, unless you're scared, I do think you should give them something. Okay? If you're scared because they might attack you, well, that's something else. Well, that's one type of charity. And every day we should be throwing coins in boxes. Not even a question. Pushes away evil decrees. Then there's another type of charity called Maisa. He's speaking about Maisa here, 10%. Now you can give between 10 and 20%, but you shouldn't do it in doubt. You should know how much you're giving, 13%, 14%. You should know how you're doing. It's after tax money. You should sit down and work out what you're giving, but it shouldn't just be nonchalant. Then there's a third level of charity, which is not speaking about over here, and that is if, God forbid, somebody sinned in life. In the olden days, you would fast a lot. Today, we're not allowed to fast, so we redeem it with charity. From that level, you can give far more than a fifth because you're doing it to redeem your soul. It's like no difference to paying a doctor. But over here, he's speaking about the Maisa money. That Maisa money should be worked out how much you're giving. Okay. So therefore, I think the takeaway of this Mishnah is don't live in doubt. No more doubt. Good. Then Yud Zayin. And how do you not live in doubt? By the way, when you have a Rav, it tells you this is kosher. And therefore, I take the soup to the Rav and I say, Rav, is the soup kosher? A little bit of milk fell in. And the Rav says it is 100% kosher because it was less than a 60th. Bang. Okay. 17. You know, by the way, it's easy to be frum and easy to remove yourself and easy to separate yourself, but is that really what it's all about? Is that really what it's all about? And that's why, by the way, there was a concept called a Nazir in Jewish law. And what was a Nazir? He decided he's not drinking wine for a whole bunch of days. And he had to grow his hair long. But after that, why? To become a little bit more holy. But after he was finished that, he had to bring a special apology to God. A special apology sacrifice. Why? Because on the one hand, yes, it is nice that I've escaped from the world and I've bettered myself, but that's not what God created us for. There's enough things that are forbidden. We're not allowed to eat prawns. We're not allowed to eat shellfish. We're not allowed to eat the hindquarter of an animal. There are a billion things we can't eat. We're finding ourselves more things we can't eat. So the Torah doesn't want you to do that. The Torah wants you to live in the world and elevate everything around you that's permitted. And the more you have, the more you should enjoy. Let's end off with one Mishnah, and that goes Shimon Benoi. So this is the great-grandson of Hillel. Shimon Benoi. Right? Now, he was one of the 10 martyrs. He's one of the famous 10 martyrs that we read about in Yom Kippur. For another shiur, we'll discuss those 10 martyrs, how they actually were reincarnations of Joseph's brothers. But that's for another time. But he was one of the martyrs of the Jewish people. Okay, he lived during the destruction of the temple. And it says about him, he said like this: Kol yomei gedalti bin hachachamim. My entire life, I was brought up amongst the sages. So now there's an argument when he wrote this. Did he write this as a kid? Because his name's Shimon, he's not called Rabbi Shimon. Or because of the lesson here, did he leave his name off it? Because there's some of us, we got to 60, we know everything. We don't even want to read anymore. We don't want to gain knowledge anymore. Shimon, his entire life, looked at himself as a kid. I'm always learning. The entire world was a classroom to him. So he was always learning. And that's why he says, Kol yomei gedalti. I'm still learning every day. Every single day, I'm still learning. And I grew up amongst Chachamim. Boy, did I grow up amongst great sages. Remember, Hillel was his great-grandfather. He saw Shammai, he saw a whole bunch of sages. And then he makes the lekker line here. The best thing for the body, right? The best thing for the body is silence. Now, what does that mean? There are a few explanations of it. But one of the explanations is as follows. 120 years ago, Jewish women did not know that fatty foods actually caused heart problems. And that's why if you look at the Jewish diet, it was full of schmaltz. And the whole world didn't know. Schmaltz and this and what's it called? Hooves. Forget the name. Like hoovy food and all schmaltzy stuff. Pichar, that's the name. And they didn't realize because medicine, you had doctors until 50 years ago who smoked. They didn't see what could smoking really do to you. Until psychology and psychiatry came into being, they never really spoke about how stress can kill, which has become very popular in the last 30 years. Okay, that stress kills. Now, this is 2,000 years ago, and he writes like this: not just for the soul, but for the body, the best thing is to be quiet. Why? This is the ultimate. Because when somebody publicly humiliates you, Bechlal, to speak is bad. Too much speaking, because you're going to lie, you're going to become frivolous, you're going to start swearing, you're going to become nasty. Believe me, I've seen comedians at our functions, they go a bit wild. But put that aside. Talking too much is going to land you in trouble. But if, God forbid, somebody has insulted me publicly, humiliated me publicly, if I'm at the stage in life that I'm so at home with myself, and everything that happens to me happens from God, I know it happens from God, that I'm relaxed. Hashem wanted me to do it. If it came from Hashem, like Joseph and his brothers, if it came from Hashem, it's good for me. It can't be bad. If God wanted me to be publicly humiliated, right, then God wanted me, I have to be at home. So if I go into a rage, Posha kills me. But we've run out of time and I need to finish the Mishnah next time. I'm going to indulge. No, I'm going to leave it there. But I wanted to tell you a story. I hope I remember next time. But it's exactly 9:30. Please, God, through our learning, may the neshamas have an aliyah. May we grow a little bit. And most important of all, may we take the lessons, turn the world upside down, and bring Mashiach today. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.